Hello, truth seekers all over the world. This is Matthew from Back to the Covenant. Hope you're having an amazing day wherever you're at in the world, whenever you may be watching this. So, with this video, I want to share some reasons why my family doesn't observe the lunar Sabbath and the mostly lunar-based calendar. So, first some background on me. So, in the past, I kept the Luni-Solar calendar for over 15 years. I personally have never kept what they call the Lunar Sabbath. I was presented with some new information on the calendar a few years back by some brothers, so I had to make some changes because I want to be righteous, not right, when it comes to serving our Yahweh. I hope everyone watching this video is the same way. We should all strive to be righteous before Him, regardless of what our understandings are. Currently, my family goes by the Zadok calendar, also referred to as the priestly Zadok calendar. And this is the second year me and my wife had done it. It's been a cool experience ever since we started doing it. Some teachers online will say the Zadok calendar is a solar-only calendar, but we in our group that observed our local group that observed the Zadok calendar, we look to the sun, moon, and the stars, not just the sun, like we are instructed to do in Genesis chapter 1. Even if you disagree with the Zadok calendar and doing the feast days that way, please do me a favor and apply what Proverbs 18:13 says, which is, he who answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and a shame to him. So do me a favor and hear me out to the end of this video, please. Let me tell you one thing this is not a crescent versus conjunction discussion. The goal with this teaching is to take a look at the lunar Sabbath and see if it stands up to the test of scripture. This will not be a full-blown look at the lunar Sabbath. We will look at certain aspects of lunar Sabbath observance, but not everything. I would have to make this probably a 10-part series if I did that, but I just want to keep it to this video. But I do want to share some reasons why my family does not observe a lunar-based Sabbath. So I hope this video and this teaching is received in a spirit of love, because that is my intent. So the first scripture I'm going to look at is, actually, next scripture, is Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11. So a couple verses. Remember the Sabbath day to set it apart. 6 days you labor and shall do all your work. But the 7th day is the Sabbath of Yahweh your Elohim. You do not do any work, you nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. So everybody on your property, pretty much. For in 6 days Yahweh made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested, what day? The 7th day. Therefore Yahweh blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart. 6 days you labor, the 7th day is a Sabbath of rest. Let's keep this in mind as we move forward. Also in these verses, we can see the continuous 7-day weekly cycle. You can also see that in many other verses as well. So let's go to Genesis 1:16, since I mentioned Genesis 1 earlier. And Elohim made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. So what does lesser mean in this verse? So it's H6996 from the BDB, Katan. Young, small, insignificant, unimportant. Insignificant. That's interesting. Now, the moon does play a role in the calendar, as we see in Genesis 1:14 through 16. But from this definition, it's not as important as some might say. So, before I get into some of the reasons why I don't observe a lunar-based Sabbath, let's look at some of the claims that lunar Sabbath keepers, or what I refer to, and some people refer to them as, they might even refer to themselves as, a lunar Sabbatarian. Let's look at some of the lunar Sabbatarian claims. And these are from a couple sources. You can easily find pretty much, I got, let's see, 6 direct quotes, and you can pretty much find all these online, different websites. Quote, new moon day is not counted as one of the 6 working days, neither is it the 7th-day Sabbath. The new moon day starts the month as day 1, making the weekly Sabbaths to fall on 8th, 15th, 22nd, 29th of the lunar month. End quote. Quote, when the weekly cycle restarts at the new moon, the 7th day of every week always occurs on the 8th, 15th, 22nd, 29th days of the month. End quote. Quote, every time in the scripture a date is given for a 7th-day Sabbath, either directly or contextually, it always falls on the 8th, 15th, 22nd, or 29th, end quote. So according to the lunar Sabbath observance, the 8th, 15th, 22nd, 29th days are very important when it comes to their understanding of observing Sabbath and scripture. Excuse me. the weekly Sabbath. Quote, the new moon is a separate category of day all by itself. There are work days, Sabbaths, and new moon. End quote. Quote, the weekly cycle restarts with the observation of the first visible crescent moon. 4 complete weeks follow new moon day. End quote. And the last one. I know you're tired of me saying quote, end quote. So here's the last one. Quote, the Sabbath is based off the phases of the moon or close to the phases of the moon. So that one's like a loose quote because there are disagreements about this particular detail within different lunar Sabbath camps. So here are some questions to ponder before moving forward. And we see any of this in Scripture. And what I mean by this is the 6 quotes that are the claims from lunar Sabbatarians. Can we see any of this, what I mentioned, in Scripture? What happens when you have a 30-day month? Because lunar Sabbatarians will say some months are 29, some months are 30. So what do you do when you have a 30-day month? What do you do with that extra day? In this model of Sabbath observance, is the Sabbath being kept every 7 days? Very important question, because it should be, according to Scripture. Where's the instructions in the Torah or anywhere else in Scripture that tells us that the new moon day is a separate category of day? These are all questions to ponder on. There are 29.53059 days in a lunar month. Would that not throw the timing of everything off and prevent them from being able to keep the Sabbath every 7 days? And then, of course, the million-dollar question in this discussion, is the Sabbath governed by the moon? Lunar Sabbatarians say yes, and let's find out. Let's look at one more Strong's number before jumping into the reasons why I don't observe a lunar Sabbath. I promise this will be the last one. I know people's eyes gloss over when you start reading from Strong's, but we should be like what Sean Griffin calls himself, a word nerd, which I am as well. We should look at different words and do word studies and just dive deep into y'all's word. That's when he'll meet us and teach us his ways. So the last Strong's number we're going to look at is H2320, which is very important to context this discussion. And the Hebrew word is Chodesh, from 2318. The new moon, by implication, a monthly new moon. So there are believers that will say Chodesh can be used interchangeably as month or new moon in Scripture. This is done by lunar Sabbatarians and also believers that don't even keep a lunar-based Sabbath, but do the Luni-Solar calendar. I used to even use this argument myself, but I don't anymore. But there are plenty of verses where this doesn't make sense. What I mean is to use month and new moon interchangeably in these verses where Chodesh appears. So let's look at a couple in the book of Exodus, and actually specifically in chapter 12. It's 12:2. This month is the beginning of months for you. It is the first month of the year for you. Now let's interchange new moon with month, or month, new moon for month, excuse me. Same verse. This new moon is the beginning of new moons for you. It is the first new moon of the year for you. And then jump down to verse 18 in the same chapter. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, in the evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month, in the evening. Now let's replace month with new moon again. Same verse. In the first new moon, on the 14th day of the new moon, in the evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the new moon, in the evening. Now does new moon and month both make sense with these verses? No, they don't, but month does make sense. So new moon and month, from my perspective, cannot be used interchangeably when looking at verses with Chodesh in them, because at times it doesn't make sense. And for the most part, you correct me if I'm wrong on this, if you disagree in the comments, that's totally cool. We can have a nice loving conversation in the comments. But for the most part, Chodesh should be translated as month. If you really look at the context of a lot of the verses where Chodesh is translated into the King James, and then you read it in whatever version you read it, month makes sense for the most part with Chodesh, but we might look at that again later. So here are some reasons why my family does not keep a lunar Sabbath and follow the Luni-Solar calendar. And keep in mind, let me reiterate this, for 15 plus years when I first started keeping Torah, I did the Luni-Solar calendar. So some of the stuff I'm about to show, I used to use these arguments. So number 1, the moon was created on day 4, so the weekly cycle began without the moon, which means the moon doesn't govern the weekly cycle. Just going to keep that one as that. Not going to say too much. Some of these will do somewhat of a deep dive. Some of them will just hit it and run on. Number 2, a lunar Sabbath does not keep the model from creation intact, which is the 7-day pattern. The Most High gives models and patterns in his scriptures. The 7th-day Sabbath. Count 7 completed Sabbaths to Shavuot, or Pentecost, Feast of Weeks. Every 7 years is a Shemitah, etc., so on and so forth. There is no continual 7-day weekly cycle with a lunar Sabbath. Number 3, the Sabbath is on the 7th day of the week, not on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, etc. With a lunar Sabbath, the Sabbath can fall on any day of the week because of how long a lunation or a lunar month lasts. Speaking of that, that's number 4. There are 29.53059, it's very precise, days in a lunar month. How can you arrive at 6 days you work and resting on the 7th day with this number? So if you divide that number, 29.53059, by 7, you get 4.21865571. That's a number not exactly divisible by 7. Speaking of divisible by 7, this is number 5. If you accept Jubilees and Enoch as scripture, they both mention the year being 364 days. So the first verse we're going to read in Enoch is 74:12. And the sun and the stars bring in all the years exactly, so that they do not advance or delay their position by a single day unto everlasting, but complete the years with perfect justice in 364 days. And then jump over to the book of Jubilees, 6:32. And you shall command the children of Israel that they observe the years according to this reckoning, 364 days, and these shall constitute a complete year, and they shall not disturb its time from its days, and from its festivals, for all shall fall out in them according to their witness, and they shall not leave out any day, nor disturb any festivals. No, it's Jubilees 6:32. So here we have two witnesses, one from Enoch and one from Jubilees, that a year is 364 days. And then we'll jump to number 6. Continue talking about Jubilees 6. So Jubilees 6 is very problematic for a lunar-based Sabbath and calendar. So we're going to read 4 verses later, Jubilees 6:36. For there shall be those who shall assuredly make observations of the moon. Now it disturbs the seasons and comes in from year to year 10 days too soon. So then we're going to jump into verse 7 or number 7 real quick. But if you accept Jubilees and Enoch as scripture, both those books are problematic for a lunar-based calendar and a lunar-based Sabbath. So number 7 ties into number 6, the 13th month. So we see a prophetic warning in Jubilees 6:36 comes to pass about every 3rd year for everyone that observes a Luni-Solar calendar. But every 3rd year you will have to add a 13th month. This 13th month cannot be found anywhere in scripture. And I remember after I started doing the Zadok calendar, I remember every few years we'd have a 13th month and we'd talk about the congregation I used to go to, and I really couldn't understand it. I was like, why are we doing this? It's not in scripture. And it bothered me. It was one of the problems that bothered me that I could never overcome. And then Abba helped me to see some things and open my eyes to the book of Jubilees. And then the scales fell off with that problem. And I'm grateful for that. But let me reiterate, the 13th month cannot be found anywhere in scripture. Number 8, the manna. So we're going to go to Exodus 16, read 4 through 5 first. And Yahweh said to Moses, see, I am raining bread from the heavens for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day in order to try them, whether they walk in my Torah or not. So he was testing them, see if they're going to be obedient or not. He does that from time to time, even today. Verse 5, and it shall be on the 6th day that they shall prepare what they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily. And then verse 26, gather it 6 days, but on the 7th day, which is the Sabbath, there is none. Abba retaught ancient Israel the Sabbath in the wilderness with the manna, not the moon. If the moon really controlled and governed over the weekly Sabbath, there would have been no need for him to reteach them Sabbath with the manna. Please really think about this and meditate on what I'm sharing here. Let me read it one more time. Let me say it one more time, excuse me. Abba re-taught ancient Israel the Sabbath in the wilderness with the manna, not the moon. Number 9, we're going to go back to Chodesh. So Chodesh is used 296 times in the KJV. Not one of those passages gives us instructions to observe the weekly Sabbath by the moon. There are only 7 verses that have, it's very interesting, number 7. There are only 7 verses that have Sabbath and Chodesh in them. So if you search with a software like eSword or something else, if you don't have eSword, you should. It's awesome. I love it. But if you search month Sabbath, if you just do that word search, you will get Leviticus 23:24, Leviticus 23:32, and Leviticus 23:39. And if you search the term new moon Sabbath, you will get 2 Kings 4:23, Isaiah 66:23, Ezekiel 46:1, and Amos 8:5. Please fact check me on that and everything I'm sharing in this video. Please, I want to be righteous, not right. So if I say something there, please correct me. So let's read Leviticus 23:24 real quick. Speak to the children of Israel, saying, in the 7th month, on the 1st day of the month, you have a rest, a remembrance of blowing of trumpets, a set-apart gathering. The only commanded day of rest that is on the 1st day of a month is trumpets. That is the only one. But depending on your understanding of Chodesh, Deuteronomy 16:1 is the only exception to this. There's a lot of different opinions about Chodesh. So let's look at a couple of the verses if you search new moon and Sabbath. So the first one is Isaiah 66:23. And it shall be that from new moon to new moon, and from Sabbath to Sabbath, all flesh shall come to worship before me, declares Yahweh. Ezekiel 46:1. Thus said the Master Yahweh, the gate of the inner courtyard facing east is shut the 6 days of work, but on the Sabbath it is open, and on the day of the new moon it is open. In Amos 8:5, saying, when does the new moon pass so that we sell grain, and the Sabbath so that we trade our wheat, to make the ephah small and the shekel large, and to falsify the scales by deceit? So to use these 3 verses, Isaiah 66:23, Ezekiel 46:1, and Amos 8:5, to say that the weekly Sabbath is based off the moon is purely conjecture. I have to ask a question about that. Is that being intellectually honest if you do that? Just because 2 things are mentioned in the same verse does not mean they are directly correlated. Here's an example. The word sin and Passover can be seen in only 1 verse in all of Scripture. That's Numbers 9:13. So let's read that real quick. But the man who is clean and is not on a journey has failed to perform the Passover. That same being shall be cut off from among his people, because he did not bring the offering of Yahweh at its appointed time. That man bears his sin. The Passover is not a sin sacrifice. You can see from this verse that it is sin if you do not observe Passover when you are able to. Now let's relate it back to the verses in Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Amos that we just read before that. Just because Sabbath and new moon are mentioned in these verses does not mean they are interconnected. These verses are not proof that the weekly Sabbath is based off the moon. Let's use that same line of logic with another verse. 1 Chronicles 23:31. And for all the burnt offerings to Yahweh on the Sabbaths and on the new moons and on the appointed times, by number, according to the right ruling upon them, continually before Yahweh. So since new moons and appointed times are both mentioned in this verse, are they one and the same? No, of course not. They are independent of each other. They just happen to be mentioned in the same verse. Number 10, the count to Shavuot or Feast of Weeks is another problem. So we're going to go back to Leviticus 23 again, 15 and 16. And from the morrow after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, you shall count for yourselves 7 completed Sabbaths. Until the morrow after the 7th Sabbath, you count 50 days. Then you shall bring a new grain offering to Yahweh. You can't get 7 Sabbaths to equal 49 days using a lunar Sabbath. How can the count to Shavuot be exact if there's a 2-day new moon somewhere in the 7-week count, like with a month that has 30 days? Or the fact that a new moon day is separate and resets the month. That throws the count off as well. It doesn't work out. The math just doesn't work with the lunar Sabbath. Number 11, the length of the new moon. So here's an image of a lunar Sabbath month from a Lunar Sabbath site. You can find these online. So according to the Lunar Sabbath doctrine, every Sabbath falls, like we've already seen, on the 8th, 15th, 22nd, 29th days of the month every single month. This sounds good in theory, but here is one big problem. And this is a quote from good old Wikipedia. Quote, the term dark moon describes the last visible crescent of a waning moon. The duration of a dark moon varies between 1.5 and 3.5 days. Because of issues like this, lunar Sabbatarians have to make special rules to overcome the math problems. How can you have a consistent weekly pattern run by the moon if the new moon day lasts up to 3.5 days? It doesn't work. Have to ask again. Does this way to observe Sabbath get you to 6 days you work and the 7th day is a day of rest, week after week? Number 12. Ancient Israel came out of Egypt on the 15th day. Numbers 33:3. Ooh. So they departed from Ramesses in the first month on the 15th day of the first month. On the morrow of the Passover, the children of Israel went out with boldness before the eyes of all the Mitzrites, or the Egyptians. So ancient Israel came out of Egypt on the 15th day. Why would Abba have his people come out of slavery on the Sabbath, a day of rest? This is a very problematic verse for the lunar Sabbath. Number 13, John chapter 7. So we're going to read a couple verses, and I will highly recommend you read this whole chapter in context. To read everything I bring up in context. Context is key. Context is king. So I'm not reading everything in full context just so this video is not super long. I'm trying to keep it under 30 minutes if possible. Don't know if that's going to happen. John 7 verse 2, and the festival of the Jews was near, the festival of booths. So here we're talking about the Feast of Tabernacles. Verse 14, same chapter. And about the middle of the festival, Yeshua went up into the set-apart place and was teaching. So I need you to have your thinking cap on for this one. And fast forward to verse 23. If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath, so that the Torah of Moshe or Moses should not be broken, are you wroth with me because I made a man entirely well on the Sabbath? So from the context, this is most likely the weekly Sabbath and not the 8th day after the Feast of Tabernacles, which you can see from Leviticus 23:39. Feast of Tabernacles is observed from the 15th to the 21st day of the 7th month, as we can see in Leviticus 23. Then a high day or high Sabbath is observed on the 8th day to conclude the fall festivals or feasts. The middle of the festival is mentioned in verse 14. Then in verse 23, Sabbath is mentioned. Could this be an example of a Sabbath observed that is not on the 8th, 15th, 22nd, or 29th, since Sabbath is mentioned right after the, quote, middle of the festival, end quote, in verse 14? If a Sabbath occurred in the middle of the Feast of Tabernacles in John chapter 7, that would be the case. I will let you read it in context, take it to Abba, and decide for yourself. Last but not least, number 14, Exodus 40. So we're going to look at verses 2 through 5 to begin with. On the first day of the first month, you are to raise up the dwelling place of the tent of meeting, and shall put it in the ark of the witness, and screen the ark with the veil. And you shall bring in the table, and arrange what belongs on it, and bring in the lampstand, and light its lamps. And you shall set the altar of gold for the incense before the ark of the witness, and put up the covering of the door to the dwelling. So here in verse 2, we see Abba's asking Moses to, on the first day of the first month, to raise up the dwelling place of the tent of meeting. And then in verse 17, same chapter, and it came to be in the first month of the second year, on the first day of the month, that the dwelling place was raised up. Abba commanded Moses to build the dwelling place of the tent of meeting on the first day of the month. Why would he do that if that day is special, like lunar Sabbath keepers would say? So to be fair, I found a verse that I want to share that's interesting in the context of this conversation. And that is in Esther 9:18. But the Jews, and I would say read this one in context as well, the whole chapter or the whole book, depending on how serious you want to get. Esther 9:18. But the Jews who were at Shushan assembled on the 13th day, as well as on the 14th day, and on the 15th day of the month they rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Now this verse doesn't prove a lunar-based Sabbath, but it does show people resting on the 15th day of the month. They were celebrating their victory over Haman, and his evil plot to kill them, because he was trying to kill all the Israelites back then. But there's no mention of Sabbath in the context. It's just something they chose to do. They chose to rest on this day. We don't see an instruction anywhere in the Torah to do this. So this is something the people chose to do to celebrate their victory. So now let's check out one more verse before we conclude. On the day following the new moon of each month, 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of Yahweh Elohim. You shall do this for 4 weeks. Then, depending on whether the new moon has started, you shall not engage in commerce or perform paid work for 1 or 2 days. Then you shall reset your week into the 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is a Sabbath of solemn rest pattern. The new moon is a day unto itself and is a celebration separate from the other days of the week. And we can find that verse in the second book of Opinions, chapter 3, verses 4 through 6. Now hopefully we can have a sense of humor here, brothers and sisters. Matt made that up and he was joking. Let's have a sense of humor here. I was serious keeping the Sabbath and the calendar, I get that. But I made that up and I was joking, so don't get mad at me. This is not really verses in scripture, but you would think it was by looking into researching the Lunar Sabbath and how to observe it. So the folks that keep the Lunar Sabbath make bold claims. They make the bold claim specifically that says, quote, every time in scripture a date is given for a 7th day Sabbath, either directly or contextually, it always falls on the 8th, 15th, 22nd, or 29th, end quote. And I haven't found that in scripture. I would love to see one verse that says that. I comb through every time the word Shabbat appears in the Old Testament and every time the word Sabbaton appears in the New Testament. I couldn't find one. Can somebody help me out with this, please? Because I haven't found one. I don't know if I'm searching the wrong terms or what. Somebody help me, that'd be great on that one. And I would love to see from scripture all the other stuff the other claims that I quoted earlier in this video. But Lunar Sabbatarians make plenty of assertions and they make up special rules to support their belief that cannot be backed up by scripture. So like I said in the beginning, I hope this is received with a spirit of love, because that's my intent. And I put a post on Facebook earlier today. Let me see if I can pull it up real quick. That is appropriate when bringing this topic up. So here's what I said. I want to end with this. I now truly believe that the different understandings of how to observe the calendar in the Torah community is a test from Abba. We all have our points and verses on why we do the calendar we observe. I think the test is to see how we will interact with other believers when discussing the calendar, whether we walk out the fruits of the Spirit or not. Does anyone else believe this? And I got some really good feedback. So I want to end with that. Just know that I'm sharing from my personal studies where I arrived at. I don't arrive at a Luni-Solar calendar or a lunar-based Sabbath, because I see too many issues in scripture for especially a lunar-based Sabbath. If you disagree, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And if this video was a blessing to you, do me a favor and share it. Like the video, all the stuff we YouTubers ask you to do. And if you haven't subscribed already, please do. I will be back at doing the live streams, the Truth About Cosmology live streams next week. So thanks for watching and shalom.